Oh, thank you. Thank you. I should talk. I was really saying that following the sort of introductory things that compassion is particularly important right now, where we are tending and pushing towards an increasingly self-interested world, where, as the Dalai Lama said, what really matters is compassion to actually hold our humanity together. Without that, we fail as a human race, literally. It's that important. Okay, it's not empathy. Okay, empathy is not quite the same thing. It's like it's sharing feelings and saying, well, we hope you'll do better, etc. Compassion basically means you're going to do something about it. Okay. Some people say that it's shared suffering, but you actually do something. That's critical about the nature of compassion. And I'll show you some. I've got three what I describe as case studies later, where that really matters in a way that made a hell of a difference. I'll move a little bit from there. Essential. Okay. Oops, I'm sorry. All right. So compassion extends beyond empathy or sharing feelings. It's reaching out. And I had it defined by somebody else there, but it's not really necessary. Hello, hello. And as I mentioned at the very start too, compassion is not the same as empathy or altruism, though the concepts are related. Empathy refers more to generally taking perspective and feeling the emotions, including the desire to help. Compassion deeply showing our humanity, as I did say earlier. Am I speaking loud enough now? Yes? No? I'll speak louder.
I'm so sorry, Stephen. We're not usually this disorganised.
It's quite okay. Okay, I mentioned at the start that humanistic Buddhism, the very center of humanistic Buddhism is compassion. In other words, and this came out, as I mentioned before, from Venerable Tai Hsu, who actually developed the program in the first place. And the calligraphy image on the front of this book is actually the symbol in Chinese for compassion within the world. This guy died only very recently, about a year and a half ago. But every day he would do things like this, even though he's going blind. And he had every day, I mean, literally 20, 30, 50, 100 calligraphy symbols about what the... Now, still. Yes. Right, okay, I'll do it right now. Here we go, folks. I'm not getting too loud for you, please don't.
No, it's fine. Okay. Go ahead.
Anyway, as I said before too, was therefore given the opportunity to launch this book in Taiwan in December last year. We had about 150 people in the monastery, which is the first time I've launched a book in a monastery, I must admit, and probably the very last as well. And about 1,000 came in by internet from around the world as well. In fact, it's even come back. The weekend before last, there was a world conference on compassion. It was called A Compassionate Future, and they set it up as by basically the humanistic Buddhism movement. The thing is that they put on a 24-hour seminar, consistently 24 hours, because it was a world seminar, and people spoke at a time zone convenient to them, which meant that I didn't get a lot of sleep, except I had to give the final talk. But that was, I was tuned up by that. Yes, I'm sorry. It's the computer's blocking my way. Okay. Now, the key thing, this is really important about compassion, is really learning to listen and to listen deeply. Okay, I talk about it in this talk, which is about really about compassion across cultures, with the whole meaning system of the other person is quite different. It's being able to get inside and see the world from their point of view that really makes a difference. And ultimately, that means that learning to hear the whole person a recipe for becoming wise, okay? Because you're learning from the humanity by sharing and being with other people. And there's a lovely image, which I would show you if I had PowerPoint, of a bird flying his life path. And one wing is compassion and the other wing is wisdom, okay? Because we do learn increasingly by reaching out and feeling it coming back with equal power. We learn, I think, to see the world more clearly and other people a lot more clearly. I think Donald Trump hasn't got quite enough time to do that in most of his life now. And deep listening is particularly important if we're responding with care across very different cultures and so on. And I learned this so strongly by working in the UN. I mean, I worked, for example, in obviously mainly Indonesia and then Southeast Asian countries as a field director and ambassador. But also, I had the whole of. Clearly, I didn't speak loud enough then either. Sorry, I just felt I could get to the table, the end of the table. I'll be just use your finger to show me where I stand. Okay? Yeah, but I also covered up as far as Mongolia and North Korea. North Korea was different, to say the least. And we were able to introduce internet into North Korea, believe it or not. Did I talk about that last time? I can't remember. I thought I did.
Yes.
But again, it was the power of the gift, literally. And I found the power of the gift was so important over doing deals, because what you communicate is trust, and it always followed through, the trust. And that was basically how we got serious attention from North Korea itself. And we also set up meetings in places where they felt comfortable. When I got North and South Korea together a number of times. In fact, we even got an ecological zone between. Yoli, you didn't have to put that on. I understand I'm speaking. So I've got to stop while that's on?
Might be easier. We won't hear you.
Just a side story while we're waiting for that. I had a friend who was an actress from Czechoslovakia who escaped and came to my house when she first came to Australia. And I put on a party. She could speak no English at all. She acted the whole, there we go. She acted the whole night, communicated perfectly. So clearly I need to do the same thing here if I can.
You never know what to expect with this.
Okay. And counter to this approach, I found in some international agencies that they didn't listen at all. Okay. And I'll give you one particular example of what happened in an island called Siberut. And we had a team in Siberut because it's the last of the islands on the Mentawai chain, which is west of Sumatra. And it was the last island yet to be destroyed by illegal logging and traders and so on. They still basically had their 1,000-year-old culture, which was quite extraordinary. In fact, just as an aside on that, one of the first things I realized at first that they had a terrific knowledge of the greenness of their environment. Did I tell you this before?
No.
Thank God. And so in particular, they wouldn't take any more of a particular plant than they needed for their specific home things, because they knew but I assumed that meant they really were attentive to the forest and they understand how you had to balance things. It was untrue. What they were concerned about was that if they took too much of the plant, their grandfather's father's dog would die. Okay. It was ruled by ritual. Okay. And I found that ritual was right through the whole of indigenous societies, at least. It was a way of memory. Okay. The ritual reinforced that memory, even though it was a ritual in this case. We worked with them for a very long time. And I had a lovely young guy from Netherlands who learned all of the dialects of the island, and became one of the elders. It really looked after them. It did some amazing things with them. It was really fantastic. But I mean, we had to be careful. So, for example, I didn't build a school, although they needed education. Particularly girls over the age of 8 were not allowed to go to school. Okay, they had to work in the kitchen. So we had a lot of young people from Europe come out to work in the office to get a bit of experience. I'd send the young women up there and they'd work in the kitchen. Here is a pot, P-O-T, pot, they'd learn literacy in the kitchen. Education, I couldn't build a school because that was not right. But we built a really big hut where they could do their trading with other people watching them, okay?
Wonderful.
So that the illegal loggers, okay, then we added to that by having at the entrance from the jungle, it was very, very hard to get there, including a dugout canoe, by the way, at the end, which I was seriously tempted to put a flag on the front of the United Nations. But anyway, the thing was that because we did that to bring together, to save them being exploited, basically, so other people around. But then, maybe we might make this a school. And they agreed. Okay, so we did a lot of things. Now the other one is from an agency with a lot of money, and I shall not name them at this stage for the sake of politeness and legal procedures. But they came to Siberut and they decided on a village a bit further up, they would put in a water system for the people. Okay, on this water system, they spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to do it right. Okay, built all of the pipes out of steel, where there's none in the jungle to replace them. But the key thing, they didn't ask the people where they wanted the taps. Okay, so they put them in all the wrong places, and the people couldn't use it. And 2 years later, it completely disappeared. It just left. And my own guys went up there, and they used jungle products. They worked with the people to show them how to do things, and they listened, and they put the taps in the right place. Okay, and so we did the whole job for $25,000 compared to the other guy. But this is where the other guys did not listen at all. They decided to sweeten this deal. They'd give the people a mosque. Okay, they neglected to notice that none of them were Muslim. So the result was, people are wondering what the hell to do with this thing, and the only way they could use it was to take the sound system and put it in the karaoke bar. Now that's it's best for you, but it certainly didn't mean that they're listening a lot.
Which agency did you work for?
I'm sorry?
Who did you actually work for?
For the United Nations, I was
Yes.
regional director for science for Asia and the Pacific. That was the UN as a whole. But I was but I was then principal field director and ambassador of UNESCO.
All right.
Which is important in this sense, because ultimately what UNESCO's job is, I mean, on the label, is education, science, culture, okay? But more than that, it's about communication, it's about media freedom, it's about all the social sciences. It's about the meaning of life and the knowledge that powers it. So what that meant is that our job often was to actually help recreate the society and its resilience rather than come in and build pipes and things, okay? And that mattered. In fact, I'll probably mention it a bit later, but I'll say it now. It mattered particularly because this is one of the powers of revolution. I probably said this before. The thing with the revolution is everything's thrown in the air. I'm sure I talked about this, but I'll still repeat it. And it can come down differently if you can grab it. So, and the story of Suharto's fall is, again, a long story, which I know in detail because I was there. I knew the people, but I won't do that. The thing was that we looked at education, and actually the other agency heads and me decided to go up to the most remote villages we could possibly find, right at the back blocks of Kalimantan, to see what the people needed. This is because of the economic crisis, where the rupiah dropped by a factor of about 20 in terms of value, and people were literally earning $4 a month if they're lucky. Anyway, the thing was that we therefore, but everywhere I went, the people, they didn't know what it was, but we got to keep our children in school, okay? They really were committed, but they hardly knew anything about what school actually was. They just knew that was the future that may get them out of the hole that they were in. And so I was able to get some money from a number of places, but we wanted to turn the education system around because it had previously been totally rote learning, appropriate for a dictator, okay? And obviously everything happening, including in Australia, of course, is about learning together, learning creatively, okay? So we started introducing this, and it took off like wildfire, literally. Everybody wanted to do it. And I was working with UNICEF on this because we had parallel skills that helped. And it took about 8 years. Eventually, we changed the entire system of Indonesia, decentralized now, all to do with open and creative education. for about 36 million children, okay? Because they wanted it. It was their choice in particular. We didn't come and demand anything. And on communication, a similar kind of benefit. Strangely enough, the new minister who came in, who was head of the Department of Information, it was one of the sides of it, i.e. the agency which was responsible for censorship, okay? Theoretically, they were supposed to be talking about information and communication with people and so on. But they had 50,000 people censoring everything in Indonesia under Suharto. And he was personally the guy who was leading the team that killed the 5 Australians on Timor on the last day before it was, and but I know he was following deep instructions, but he'd been through a complete change of life since then. He absolutely was committed to make freedom of expression a possibility. And so I was able to get to him within 3 weeks, okay? And then he became our support all the way through. And I brought in people who were good at it in various developing countries around the world and so on. But again, I got support for that. But the result of that was that within 6-8 months, we actually changed the law. And then what we did was to make sure it worked. And that was that we built an internet connection of 32 radio stations, all of which exchanged their news reports with each other through internet. And I had a station in my office as well, which we used, which meant we were in touch with it. And it meant that nothing could be suppressed anymore. So to take an example, one person came into one of our studios that we'd helped rebuild in Aceh. This was after the tsunami, which wiped everything. And he pointed a gun at the man running the station and said, "You will not broadcast this program. It's bad for me," which they didn't. But they put it in the network and we broadcast it in Kalimantan, didn't we? And that became quite well known after a while. But again, my point is partly this. If you can capitalize on that on opportunity, even though it looks like it's dangerous, whatever else it might be, you can actually achieve amazing things. Oh, no, slowly as well. Wow. I'm learning so many skills today. Thank you so much. Now, let me also mention the issue I had when I first got to Indonesia. That was in 6 months, the 2 of my international staff were taken hostage into the jungle. Do you remember that? The young woman was pregnant, and they held them for 5.5 months, during which time the rebel group that had holding them had decided that this baby would be their new Messiah when it was born. And would be carried, not only that, would be carried into battle in front of the people so they didn't get hit by bullets. We didn't think it was a good plan at all. We went through a lot of difficult times, to say the least. And just briefly, the end of this became really bad because of the politics of Indonesia more than anything else. 2 of the Indonesians, the Javanese, were murdered as they were going through the jungle. For 5 days before we finally got the people out, they were literally running without food just to get away from everything. We finally got them out. The thing was that in the course of all this, a lot had happened to destroy their lives back in the villages where I've forgotten the number. I think the military was blamed for killing maybe up to 100,000 people, and they still control. They still control. I'm sorry. This was when not up to 90, up to 96 in particular. We worked with them a bit after that. But anyway, yeah. But it was. But the anyway, the thing was that at the end of that, it was pretty well. They'd lost all their pigs for a start. Did I talk about this before? Probably did. Pigs. The pigs. And the pigs were not only food; they also were the basis of the social relationships because the men give pigs at ceremonies, and they therefore are honoured by giving pigs at ceremonies. Okay. So the result of this was that I flew 108 pigs up to the people in the Highlands. Okay, which they kind of appreciated quite a lot. Do I sing again? I'll try and talk over it. Does that work or not?
No.
Yeah, no. No.
Just wait.
Somebody's listening to me outside here. They don't like what I'm saying right now.
It's actually fantastic, Stephen, so keep going. It's been very good. You never know what.
Oh, we'll speak out? Okay. Thank you. I'll talk over it. Right. Anyway, so but when I went up to talk to them after we'd flown all the pigs in, which is very hard, they had to come in before 8:30 in the morning, or the mist would come in, and you couldn't fly anything at that time. And I've got a photograph which I would have shown you, of course. At one stage, I came into it wasn't this village, but I can sing, not very well.
It won't be long. It'll
Okay.
finish soon.
Oh, good.
This is one of the difficulties of being in Parliament House.
Stephen, can you just, because nobody's seen your book.
Okay.
We're a patient lot.
I think there's more compassion in artificial intelligence than there is in humanity.
Yes and no.
Question mark.
No, I think humans are horrible to each other.
Mm.
They can
They've
be.
got hidden agendas.
But
and
artificial
politicians-
intelligence can also be a device by which people do control other people.
But at least if you've got an artificial intelligence that you've set up, you know, like they say with the robots could do no harm.
I'll come back to you.
Okay.
Okay, no, we talked to the people up in the Highlands. They literally had never been out of the jungle ever. Okay? They had no idea what the world was like.
Papua New
All
Guinea.
they saw, no, West Papua,
Oh, West
Indonesia,
Papua, sorry.
yeah.
Indonesia.
And the people are basically the same, but the language is different, and the rule is absolutely totally different to Papua New Guinea. And so I said, all right, and I brought 27 of them to Jakarta, okay, out of the jungle by ship, by one of my guys looking after them all the way up and so on. And of course, they'd never seen the outside world, and the outside world hadn't seen them either. And by the time they got to Jakarta, it was a big media role, you know. And Suharto was still in power at this stage. This was after 98. And sorry, early, just before 98, but 1997 it was. And so the people came to Jakarta, and Suharto's became a big media role. So Suharto's one of his ministers who earned $150 a month and had 6 restaurants and a few other things, you know, to help him along. He said, I would like to bring these people to lunch at one of my restaurants. And they, fine, they didn't know what a restaurant was for a start. You know, it just seemed what a city was before this. And so he took them to this restaurant. Now, it wasn't just a restaurant. It was a Japanese restaurant with teppanyaki. So they watch this thing, thinking it's the same as all restaurants, where they're throwing the bloody food to each other like this. You know? I have this terrible fear that I've introduced a whole new practice in West Papua of having, you know, following the West. You know, that they've done. But then the other thing happened that was that it had become a big, we had CNN and everyone interested in what was going on. So I wanted to put on a press conference in the UN building, right? And I talked to these guys who were translated. And they said, that's no problem. We give speeches at most of our ceremonies. We can do that easily. It's not a problem. But we want to dress formally. I said, fine, a suit and tie. It's perfectly okay. They came to this press conference, and I gave a press conference with a group of 27 naked men, except for their pinter sheath. That was formal. Well, they later gave me a tribute ceremony. They took me up to the jungle, and all sorts of interesting things happened, including the fact that the charter plane was 5 hours late getting there, which meant all the pigs had to be pulled out of the ground and were fly blown. And being the honoured guest, I had to eat first, okay? And the thing one learns about being an ambassador in a jungle situation is always carry a Swiss penknife, because I sliced off the tiniest sliver of the best bit, which is the heart and the jaw that I'm given to being honoured. Eat as little of it as I possibly could. But this is so good, I must pass it on to you. I cannot have this for myself. Anyway, they went on, and the tribute ceremony occurred, and they did lots of things, including a beautiful statue, which is by the by. But mainly spears, bows, and arrows, and 6 penis sheets. Okay, for me to take home. All right. Now that's fine, except I had to travel after the charter flight. I had to catch a commercial flight from the capital to the capital of the city, and I literally arrived at the X-ray machine with this many bloody weapons in my hands, And the guy looks at me and says, "That's too hard. Take it on board," which I did. I had a diplomatic passport, so that probably helped a little bit, but still, it's really hard to. In case it ever happens to you, it's very hard to fit a spear in a luggage locker. Okay. Okay, so moving on from there, I'm going to pick out one element of the story, because this was, again, back to deep listening, okay? And it's what happened when we finally got through to have the ability to speak to these guys in the jungle, okay, about the negotiations. And there are lots of reasons why we couldn't do that to the start. I won't go into that. The thing is that on one side, they took a guy called Frank Meyer, who was a really courageous doctor who went off and learned bush medicine, in fact, so we could actually work with these people. And he was our representative, because I could not represent it as an ambassador without intruding on the social political situation in the country. So we were always slightly behind them. But he was very good. And they took him from his helicopter, 200 meters or so, and sat him on the top of a 100-meter ravine with all of the people around him dressed in spears and bows and arrows and looking like this, okay, which is a bit unsettling. In fact, it happened to me, just as an aside. I started this story a minute ago, but when I had to go to one of the other tribes further down around Agos, the plane I took in was a commercial, it was a charter plane, and bigger than the number of people. There were 4 of us basically there. But I got off the plane at the front to go and have a look at to take a photograph of the plane. I looked up the hill, and there's 200 bloody tribal warriors rattling their spears in their nakedness, And I thought, this is not good, I wasn't sure which god I should pray to at that time. But and then they charged, and I'm standing alone at the front of an aeroplane in the middle of the jungle airstrip with 200 tribesmen with spears coming at me. Okay, that was one of the more insecure moments of my life, I must admit. But it turned out it was a welcoming ceremony. So they swerved around the plane, and they even survived skidding on my sweat as I went by. I was perspiring so much. Anyway, back to the point. It's about the conversation, because the first thing that the other side of the conversation, a guy called Titus, who was number 3 in the rebel hierarchy, said to him, after sitting and staring at him for 2 minutes, "What do you want me to wear, a T-shirt or a penis sheath?" Not the way you normally start negotiations about hostages, But Frank understood what he was asking. Okay, what he was saying is, "Do you understand that I don't want to live in your world? I've got my own total world here that I'm in. Are you telling me I've got to get out of it?" And the second thing was, anyway. So what Frank said was, after a minute, "No, that's entirely your choice. It's got nothing to do with me. You choose whichever life you want. But I have 3 T-shirts if you're cold." In other words, he gave the other value, which is the giving of gifts, which is basic to the whole structure of the society. Okay, and when he came back a week later to see the same guy again, he had Titus had a gun next to him. Okay, and so Frank said, "Is that to protect you from me?" He said, "No, that's to protect you if the military attack." And it was true. And that was the basis, that sort of relationship of actually understanding each other's culture a little was the basis of we ultimately getting an agreement, which we thought was going to work until other political things got in the way a bit. We got them out eventually. So my point here is listening underneath to hear, and therefore relate. In this case, it really mattered. The next thing is a situation of what I call, this is talking about stories that show the importance of deep listening. Okay, and my second story is actually back in Australia, and it comes out of the area near Katoomba in New South Wales, and it's what I describe as what is called illness intelligence. Okay. Now, the thing is, in Australia, we're very fortunate to have access to high quality informed medical care. Not the case in many of the countries I worked in. The cost of $10 for anti-pneumonia tablet is too much unaffordable. So people are so much more sick than they ever are in Australia for that reason. So health is also partly a product of the assumption of a self-focused global economic system. That means some people benefit and other people do not. That, to me, is what we're overcoming, with I hope, with compassion. But illness also offers an opportunity to support other people and participate in their world. And in a sense, in a fully shared humanity. Many people have illness and become social isolation for them. They simply can't go out, or they're too ill, or whatever it might be. So they live a life of exile without being perhaps even able to talk to people at all. But the case here was popularized by a man called Kelly Medwick. This is back in 2000, about 2000, and no, later than that, about 2020. And he noted, and the report of what happened was this. Neil Duncan was a saxophone player, and he was a professional saxophone player. His whole life was built around being a professional musician and a jazz musician. But he developed cancer, and it was terminal cancer eventually, and he even knew that at the time. But they had to amputate his right arm, which meant he couldn't play the saxophone anymore. Okay. So his friends and his wife, but particularly his musician friends, they put on a big party for him before he had to give up his saxophone, so he could feel he's done his last sort of great gig. And then they got together and they found a man in Amsterdam called Martin Visser, who made instruments for disabled people. Okay, so for example, he made flutes for people who could basically were very seriously disabled. But what this guy Visser did was to make for Neil Duncan a one-handed saxophone. Okay, so he could with one hand play a saxophone, whereas previously he could not. Okay, it took him 6 months to learn how to do it. And then, of course, his friends put on a really big party for him where he could play his one-handed saxophone again and feel like his life had returned to it. Okay, and not only that, he got some of his people reported this back to people in England. And so Channel 4 picked him up and they put on a feature about this guy. But they also were doing a back work for the Paralympics that was coming up. And they had set together a band of people with major handicaps. And of course, they invited Neil along to be part of this band. Okay. To give you an idea, the bass player had a hook and no hands. The keyboard guy had stumps. He still played a creative piano and somehow. And it was a hit. That then got picked up as a sort of a world event, which took him on to more things, giving concerts and ultimately recording in the Abbey Road studios of what used to be the Beatles. In other words, his whole life was actually better in what he was doing than ever in his life before this moment, okay? Rather than being totally at home with people saying, oh, I'm sorry, whatever. That, to me, is an excellent example of what I'm talking about for compassion. He died at the start of, he died at the start of 2021. 2021. And he was farewelled by his own band playing sort of in the character of the New Orleans style jazz in Lure, the Lure Memorial Gardens. But the last 4 years of his life, instead of being totally destroyed, was actually in many ways the happiest time he ever had because of what was achieved.
That's wonderful.
The next story, I've got three. Maybe mention a couple of things, but three main stories. And this one is about something which happened during 2020 in Manila, in the Philippines, with a woman I know quite well, who actually wrote the last chapter in that book, by the way, called Cecile. And what she's reporting is that in Manila, of course, there was lockdown, as there were in lots of other places. But as by data from ILO, International Labour Organization, 72.5% of people live and make their money on the informal income, and they couldn't do it. So the level of hunger, not just disadvantage.
Serving food from their carts on the streets.
On the street, or making money by selling things to people, whatever. But it's an informal economy, not in organisations and so on. Okay? So the level of hunger, just selling, became incredibly difficult. For example, in Manila, 37% of the entire population of 7.6 million households came up from, 10% hungry in the first quarter, 20% in the second quarter, and nearly 40% in the third. They were just hungry, okay? Hunger is different to being disadvantaged, particularly when you see the children cry, okay? So it really was very deep. And this young woman called Anna Patricia Non, young 26-year-old woman, could see this. She'd been working with disadvantaged people before, and she decided to do something about it. And so she went through her own larder at home, and she pulled out all the things that could be useful: rice, vegetables, milk, vitamins, face masks, canned goods, soap, and other essentials, and put them on a cart, which she got approval to put out on the street, a bamboo cart. I've got a picture which I can't show you of this cart, which had a sign on it that said, what was it? Give what you can, take what you need. Okay. In other words, people just simply could come, and they did. Now, the point of it was she put it on internet. Being a 26-year-old, she had it on internet that night that she'd done this, and it was an important idea. Within a day, it started to get around the whole of Philippines by internet and social media. Okay, within a week, it became a way of doing things across the whole of the Philippines. Okay,
Amazing.
of this building a cart for the people who were suffering and needed the care. And to me, this was, I think, a very important thing to keep in mind. What it's saying in particular is that you, as an individual, can do really important things.
Yeah.
You certainly don't have to have government behind you, because they were not connected in any way to this program. It was entirely through communities talking with each other, and through an idea that really mattered in terms of bringing them together. So the couple of key lessons, three key lessons came out of this about deep listening, which is what I'm particularly saying. In the case of the Papuan cross-cultural hostage negotiations, the need to hear from within the other people's world of meaning. Okay. From the second case of illness intelligence, the need to penetrate to the underlying need, rather than stop at offering comfort that doesn't address what really matters. And this is in our neighbourhood, right next door. And from the third case of COVID care, the opportunity of being able to tap our humanity in the terms of sharing humanity and generate an immediate wildfire of rapidly spreading real public care for those greatest in need of compassion and care. And I think these are three really important things. We live right now in troubled times. I mean, forget the case of Mr. Trump, whatever might happen from that. But I mean, to give you more examples, the United Nations, with the war in the Middle East and the war between Russia and Ukraine. In the case of the Middle East, a child is dying every 10 minutes in Gaza. Amongst the 40,000 people killed so far during the current fighting, 16,456 were children, and 11,000 were women, absolutely unconnected to what actually is going on. We move around and we see climate change increasingly a difficulty or a problem, from inadequate care in the way that we've shared and dealt with our planet. Furthermore, we confront massive increase in inequality and suffering, and I've done actually I may have mentioned this before too. I published 2 books with the Center for the Creative Economy in Japan where I was working between 2015 and 2020 on part-time each year. We ran a program where we decided that we would turn economics on its head, and instead of economics values that are used in exchange, being the values that then spread through the way humanity operates between us all, we turn it upside down. And let's start with the values of humanity and see if we can make economics work within that framework, which you can. Okay. So we looked at that. And one result of that is I looked very carefully, in fact, at both the levels and the progress on inequality and suffering worldwide, and the particular level of inequity, so that there are now 8 men who control over 50% of all of the world's economy. 50%. You could sit them easily around this table, probably more comfortable chairs, given how much money they make. But even so, you could still have a small power like this. Yet people are starving around the world. To me, what matters is spreading the fact that we understand we are part of that humanity. We ourselves, as in my last example, can make a real difference, a very major world difference. But as a number of people say, I think it's Mahatma Gandhi, as a matter of fact, said, if you want to change the world, you must be that change. Okay, and that's what I'm saying. Basically, it is a message. So externally, we're challenged by human impact on our planet, injustice in our society. Internally, we confront danger and fear. At heart, because of self-interest and related wrong views, but we can turn that around. We can do something about it. Caring, sharing, valuing each other is the essence of our humanity, and humanity won't survive without it. So compassion in this is the light that guides us in terms of where we go. It's something to keep in mind, at least in the back of your mind. And it's not just saying, oh, I understand the problem. It's a matter of saying, well, what am I going to do about it? Okay, that's part of it that matters. Okay, every person can do that. It's possible every awakened individual can benefit from personal liberation themselves of the connectedness and listening. And that's what I say. You may be involved in this. It may be possible to even put change into the world, but you continuously learn from this. You learn in a way that ultimately makes you wiser and better able to make sensible decisions about everything as a result of being like that. So the action plan that comes from that, which was suggested, firstly, identify the key underlying dynamics of the crises we confront, but reading these crises through humanity's eyes. In other words, what's that mean about people and how they relate? Secondly, contrast the distortions of reality that a self-possessed view compared to what can be done if we work through the crises together, as was the case, for example, in the Philippines. And as Hugh Mackay said in the earlier quote, acting to build harmony across difference rather than requiring conformity. Harmony between people who are quite different from each other and should not be tried to push them into a single plug hole. And finally, demonstrate practical applications of this path of change towards awakening. Awakening for people, particularly if we could get to the guys at the top who are quite frankly unseeing of anything but themselves and their own powerful interest, to look at the issues that really are affecting us right now. Certainly war in the Middle East and Ukraine and so on is one major thing. But so too is climate change, gender-based violence, and dehumanizing effects of social media when dominated by commodities, commodification and addiction. So my final word comes back partly to what the Dalai Lama said, and partly comes back to a statement by the previous Venerable Master of Humanistic Buddhism, Xing Yun, who sadly passed away in February last year, who I had the opportunity, great privilege of meeting, in fact. I had an audience with him in Taiwan a few years ago. And his position is this: loving kindness and compassion are like a priceless passport. A person may own nothing, but no matter where they go, happiness and safety will follow. And then back to the 14th Dalai Lama, I see compassion as the basis of human survival. And for me, it means something, perhaps even a little bit more, because I had the extraordinary opportunity of working with people in very different situations and cultures. And to me, that's what mattered. Thank you.
So those 8 men,
Sorry?
those 8 men who sit around the table, Do you think they even care in the slightest about anything
No.
other than themselves?
No, I don't.
Are they
You
all
don't?
politicians?
No, there's
No,
people
they-
like Musk and Trump.
Yeah.
and-
I think
Oh, well, I
politicians.
suppose
I think you can leave those and go to Rothschilds and the very top ones who control.
Sorry?
Mr. Murdoch. might be one
Mr.
of them.
Murdoch, yes, and
Let's go to, oh my goodness, those at the very top, really.
Mark Zuckerberg.
They're up there.
Very top.
Bezos.
Yes, please.
No, really.
Excuse- Sorry.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, because they make the
Question from the
rules.
back. Can't hear it.
Sorry, first of all,
Well, we live by them.
being like, if I told you why, you probably guess my age. I have to return it also one of to the authorities. It took a lot of it. However, can I just say this? It appears to me, if I may take it to current politics in America, it's going to be very transactional. It's going to be totally number of deaths, etc. won't be in the equation, unfortunately. You look at the team of Donald Trump's opponents, it just all seems to be directed towards that kind of approach. And Ukraine's the best example. I mean, my opinion, is they're the most abandoned people I've ever seen.
Yep.
I mean, it's really been supplied with to the last soldier dies. That's really what the equation seems to be. And now it seems to be accelerated in that sense. And you're on the other side with Putin and the types of people he's putting on the front lines in terms of criminals giving them freedom if they go and fight in Ukraine. And a lot of them survive and return to their old habits. And they're heroes.
Can we not talk politics, because I'm completely against what you're talking
Oh, okay, sorry.
about. So can we not talk politics? Can we just talk
Yeah.
about your books, really? I prefer that.